remember Drifter from a profile I did titled Watsonville Hitters. He got caught up with Francisco Valenciano, Scarface, and Anthony Gonzalez, bouncer from Watsonville, and I believe he turned on both of them. Anyways, the C's in the federal system, they believed that Stork was loyal to them. They also believed that he would take steps towards corrective action once he got back to Pelican Bay, and they had no reason to believe that he wouldn't be loyal. He had been in the Bay for years. He got indicted in Operation Black Widow. He was with the rest of them in the Santa Rita County Jail. He was with them in the Glen Dyer Federal Detention Facility in Oakland. So they believed that he was loyal. However, things changed when he got to Pelican Bay and they were no longer around each other. Instead, Stork allowed himself to be manipulated and swayed into betraying the organization by also setting his sights on usurping the authority of the duly elected generals and stealing the guardianship of the organization. So this is what happens. After Stork arrives, Chuco approaches him with the idea of reestablishing a new mesa. Stork and Chuco are both sold on the idea, so they both take it to Conejo, a longtime senior member. But keep in mind, at that time, Conejo was supposed to have been stripped. He didn't have no status, but they take it to him anyway. They advise him of their intentions, and the three of them together, they take it to DC, who at that time was the highest ranking member in Pelican Bay. And they did this knowing that the NF Constitution doesn't provide any revisions or amendments for the restructuring of any new or separate high command. It does not exist. Again, I already broke this down and explained NF protocol in its proper interpretation in those other profiles that I told you guys about. So scroll back and watch them if that's something that you're interested in. So now fast forward to 2018, 2019. BJ just got convicted on his LWOP and he just now lands back in the state system. Now, as you guys know, I was in touch with BJ for quite some time and I put out a number of different recordings where we discussed everything that happened in the state. We talked about everything that led to his situation, and then we talked a lot about what transpired between the state and federal factions. For anyone interested in hearing those recorded phone calls, you can still hear them on my channel. So before IGI spooked BJ and threatened to either move him or transfer him if he continued to put content out on my channel, he told me that the coordinated effort with the federal faction by himself, Mateo, and several other C's started as far back as when he was still in the county jail fighting his case. This is when he first started communicating with the C's in the federal system about regaining control of the state system. Because by this time, Chuco, Conejo, and DC had already hijacked the state system and were spewing rhetoric and false propaganda about Skip and Corny, the door policy in Pelican Bay Shoe, and their justification for partaking in the peace treaty with the Mexican mafia. I'm going to get into it in a minute. I'm just letting you guys know how this all played out step by step. So now in or around 2016, a good C by the name of John Musquiz, I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name right, Musquiz, Knockers from Sacra, was one of the first NF members that fell victim to Conejo's agenda. The year prior, in 2015, Antonio Villagrana, Sombras from San Jose, was also hit. Keep in mind that in 2015, there were still a lot of NF, MA, AB, and BGF members that were still being released from the SHU programs. They were trickling them out slowly and they were placing them in different prisons all throughout California. So the relations amongst these organizations was still fragile and they were still trying to fill each other out. And according to what BJ would later tell me, Conejo was playing up to certain Mexican mafia members out there, all in an attempt to solidify a rapport with them and to basically let them know that he was fully on board with the peace treaty. He was so bent on playing up to him that he was even willing to sacrifice his own fellow brothers if that's what it took. So allegedly, Knockers was freelancing. He was selling his own clavo before the Casas clavo. And initially, this is what got him in hot water. In addition, I guess Knockers was also doing some side business with a couple of Sureños. And there was an MA member by the name of Dennis Ortiz, Woody from Compton 7-0s, that didn't particularly like it. I don't know any of the other details, but Conejo had Knockers moved on to send Woody a message that he was willing to whack his own people to maintain the integrity of their relationship. Conejo was actually on B yard at the time, but Chuco was on C yard when this incident took place. So they had Edgardo Rodriguez, Big Evil from EPA, and Alex Yurigoyen, Sleepy G from San Jose, hit him. It just doesn't get any dirtier than that. Knockers didn't do nothing wrong. I know Knockers. Knockers was a solid NF member. I knew him as far back as 1992. I was with him in Pelican Bay in D7. But he didn't do nothing wrong. He had a symbiotic business arrangement worked out with these two sureños, and it benefited all three of them. And it's not like he was twisting their arms to sell esclavo. This was something that they freely did because they were making money. But needless to say, it was more important for Conejo to play up to Woody by having Knockers hit, so that's what he did. So like I said, when BJ landed back in the state system, he had already coordinated somewhat of a plan with the brothers in the feds. And BJ, his first order of business when he got back to the state was to try to initiate contact with Mateo so that they could then execute their plan. In fact, it was BJ's link to the feds that suggested that he get in contact with Mateo so that they would have an established open line of communication with him as well. But here's the thing. Conejo and Chuco, they were already well aware of the fact that BJ and Mateo both had a close association with some of the C's in the feds. And because of this, they were leery of them. They didn't have justification to whack them just based on who they might be loyal to, but nonetheless, this put big targets on both of their backs. And it was obvious. So now this is when Mateo and BJ both began to make a strong push against Conejo, Chuco, DC, and their newly elected chain of command. They basically wanted the entire chain of command to disassemble and get in line with the federal faction. But keep in mind, they were both smart enough to know that they had to be careful about how they chose to proceed and execute their plan, based on the fact that Conejo, Chuco, and DC had already won the favor of all the other C's in the state system. They were supporting them. It was the same kind of situation when I had to strip Carlitos in Corcoran. He had the support of all the NF members that were there at that time. This was the same situation with BJ and Mateo, except they were up against the entire state system. So around this same time when all this was happening, I believe that Mateo, he also had a relative that was in Salinas Valley with Conejo at this time. I believe his name was Joe Jefferson, who they called Joe Jeff. At some point, he claimed that Joe Jeff was feeding information to Mateo and that he was basically alerting him to everything that was happening in Salinas Valley. This eventually led to Joe Jeff getting caught up. I personally believe that there were other C's that didn't like what was going on. However, I believe that they just didn't have the balls big enough to stand up and call these guys on their shit. And I can say that because I know a few of them and I've been around them. But these are not the type of C's that will put their neck on the line and speak up when they see someone doing something wrong. Instead, I can see them staying quiet and just acting like they're part of the team. I'm not going to say who they are, but if you're watching this, you know who you are. These individuals obviously feared that they probably become targets themselves. But the thing about BJ and Mateo is that I know that both of these brothers knew that the federal system was counting on them. And they probably even felt like the integrity of the NF survival was dependent on them getting the state system in alignment. So because this profile is mainly about Mateo, I'm not going to get into the details of what happened when BJ got hit. But for now, I'm just going to concentrate on what happened with Mateo at Pleasant Valley. So in the later part of 2018, in an attempt to regain control of the organization, communication was sent to Mateo apprising him that both Chuco and Conejo had been deemed no good for blatant acts of treason or for basically hijacking the state system. He was also informed that this decision was rendered by the three generals at that time, Corny, Pinky, and Tibbs, and that DC was being placed on freeze. It's further communicated that this decision was reached by consensus vote by the three elected generals, Corny, Pinky, and Tibbs. So once that communication was established, they bring Mateo up to speed with everything that was going on all the current state of affairs, and then they appoint him as the liaison to California. Furthermore, at that time, Mateo was also given the responsibility of carrying out the will of La Familia by making sure that both Chuco and Conejo, who were referred to as traitors, were both hit and dealt with. However, this communication never makes its way to Mateo. Instead, it gets intercepted by Samuel and Chuco, who purposely hid it and sat on it for over a year. When that kite hit the yard and they seen that it was destined to Mateo, they got suspicious and they opened it up. This obviously put Mateo under a serious cloud of suspicion, as they were now trying to determine whether or not this was the first communication or if there was already a plan in motion. The other thing about this intercepted filter that created more blowback was the fact that BJ's name was also mentioned as a fellow cohort. If he wasn't under a cloud of suspicion before this filter was intercepted, he was definitely under one now. Whoever the federal link was that sent that filter completely dropped the ball and put BJ and Mateo both in their crosshairs. That kite definitely should have been coded up or sent through a more secure line. But what do I know? Who am I to criticize? Shit happens. But I mean, whoever it was that was in charge of their communications, their secretary or whatever title they gave this individual, whoever it was super sloppy, because a lot of them were being posted on YouTube before they even made their way to their destination. So because that communication got intercepted, a year passes and basically nothing happens. I'm sure that Pinky and Corny probably assumed that maybe BJ and Mateo both fell victim to Conejo's manipulative scheme, or that they opted out for one reason or another. But then the federal faction gets alerted that their previous communication had been intercepted and that it never reached its destination. From my understanding, they were alerted by someone that was closely associated to Conejo and Chuco. I'm telling you, at that point, nobody could be trusted. BJ said that it was nearly impossible to know who was loyal to who and who it was that were either acting as spies or plants. At any rate, this gives Corny, Pinky, Tibbs, and Skip some renewed hope that their plan might still be in effect. So they reach out to Mateo a second time and they advise him that their previous kite had been intercepted. When Mateo receives this kite, he immediately knows that this could create potential serious problems. With the cat out of the bag, Mateo notifies Duck, Gangster, and Turtle of these current developments. Together, the four of them enter into a pact and agree to fulfill the directives that had been previously passed down by the organization's elders. In my opinion, this is where I believe Mateo and the others dropped the ball. And I say this out of an abundance of respect, only for the purpose of pointing out that I would have proceeded forward from this point on a different course of action. I would have moved forward with blasting Conejo and Chuco, as I would have already had the authorization I needed. But that's not what they do. Instead, Mateo goes to DC and inquires as to why that kite had been intercepted and why it was kept under wraps for so long. He also presses DC about the need to have both Conejo and Chuco hit. Like I said, I think Mateo and the other three should have moved forward with their plans to hit both Conejo and Chuco without taking it up with DC. I think this was one of the critical mistakes that they made, and they took a huge risk by doing that. So initially, DC agrees to move forward with the plan to hit Conejo and Chuco, and he was fully on board with the plan. He said, if this is coming from the brothers in the feds and if this is what they want done, then let's do it. Let's move forward with it. However, when he found out that this transition also included him being demoted and placed on freeze, he reneged and changed his position. Do you guys see the cutthroat backstabbing and the deception that comes so naturally with some of these guys? Your own brothers will burn you up and watch you get butchered as long as it doesn't affect them and relegate their position. DC didn't give two shits about Conejo and Chuco when it came down to it. But as soon as he found out that his political position was going to be affected and that he was going to lose his status as the appointed GAO, he switched up and played his next card. Because listen, being demoted from his position really only meant one thing, that he was going to forfeit the privilege of raking in thousands of dollars that was being generated from the street regiments and all the illicit activities that they were involved in behind the walls. The clavo, cell phones, and whatever other money-making ventures they were involved in. I'm telling you, the game is dirty. If you don't know how to navigate and push your way through it, you also end up getting the shitty end of the stick. So like I said, the blowback that they get from going to DC only backfired. So then DC, he plays his next card by informing both Chuco and Conejo in Salinas Valley of these impending matters. This is textbook cutthroat politics at its best. DC obviously knew that this was going to sabotage both Mateo and BJ's plans. But since this was going to affect him adversely, this was his purpose. So together with the help of a few additional renegade C's, Sammy and Puppet from San Jose, Trini from Early Mar, and Capone from Grifas, they systematically used calculated manipulation, deceit, false propaganda, outright lies, threats, and tyranny to solidify and build shields around themselves. So once it was all out in the open, Mateo and Duck, they both confront Chuco and they ask him what happened, who had given them authority to reestablish high command. Because remember, up until that point, Chuco and Conejo, they both claimed that they had the blessings of high command in the federal system to reestablish a new chain of command. Mateo and Duck, they pressed Chuco further. Why were our C's not informed about communication directives coming from Corny, Skip, and Pinky? And why no one was told that they were deemed no good? But again, what was the purpose of confronting Chuco? In my opinion, there was nothing productive that would have came out of that, and nothing did. All they did was tip their hands and made their intentions and their positions crystal clear to first DC and now Chuco. They had the blessings of the brothers in the feds to move forward. Nothing more really needed to be said at that point. So heated discussions, they ensued between Duck, Mateo, and Chuco. They go back and forth, and they continue to put the pressure on Chuco. They continue to go back and forth, but they continue to press him. They continue to ask him, why did you hide that kite? What are you hiding? What's your intentions? What's your motive? So at one point, Chuco, he finally comes clean and he admits that they established high command on their own, that they didn't have authority. Mateo and Duck tell Chuco that him and Conejo, they need to step down and they need to appoint the most qualified C's to take over Salinas Valley. Conejo, he begins to feel the pressure and initially he concedes, but only under the stipulation that Trini from Erdingmar fill the void as the GOP. He wanted Trini to fill the void so that he could continue to control him and act as his personal puppet master. So this is around the time when the truth filter started circulating, and this was their last-ditch effort to try to maintain control of the state. At this point, Conejo and Chuco, they try to hunker down and maintain their positions, but the feds, they're closing in on them. And on top of that, unfortunately for Conejo and Chuco, they make the mistake of painting both Skip and Corny in a negative light and go as far as saying that they're banishing them from the organization. They couldn't have picked a worse way of poking the bear by trying to assassinate the characters of two highly respected longtime C's who were both credited with making a number of noteworthy sacrifices for the organization. So when confronted about the peace treaty and the agreement that they had with the Mexican mafia, Conejo and Chuco actually tried to use the old door policy that was in effect in Pelican Bay to justify their actions. They tried to claim that the peace treaty was a product of the door policy, something they established, and that this was a continuum of that policy. I talked about this in the NF insurrection, and this was probably one of the craziest things that I heard in all the back and forth rhetoric. So now fast forward again until the middle of 2019. After concluding that Conejo, Chuco, and now even DC were stagnating their progress and that they were clearly just trying to cling to their positions, Mateo begins reaching out to some of the other senior C's in other prisons who have been around and who know the ways of the O. Those included were Mateo from Salinas, Sleepers from San Jose, Spider from Lodi, Belucas from Oakland, Silencio from San Jose, Esteban from San Jose, Dreamer from San Fran, the late Big Mondo from Delano, Sleepy from San Jose, Gangster from Visa, Duck from San Fran, and BJ from Watsonville. These were the C's that the federal faction was depending on to band together, to rise up, and to honor their commitments by getting the state system back in order, which obviously also included hitting both Conejo and Chuco. But shortly after things started to look like they were moving in the right direction, three things occurred that put in motion a declaration of war by those in the state that were supposed to be leaders. Turtle from San Jose, who made a pact with Duck, Gangster, and Mateo in Pleasant Valley, was transferred to Solano, and he would later betray these C's. The second thing that happened was that Gangster from Visa, who was made the RC after Turtle's departure, was indicted on a federal RICO indictment. And then the third thing that happened was that Chino from Oakland arrived at Pleasant Valley from High Desert and became the new RC after Gangster from Visa was transferred to the Fresno County Jail. So this is when things got to the point where Mateo and Doug were getting impatient and they had basically seen enough. So sometime around March or April of 2019, Mateo, followed by Duck a week later, were both stripped of their status and were removed from their seats on the inner council. And this was due to frivolous complaints and the denial of due process under the NF Constitution. A campaign was basically led by Chuco and Conejo's minions to politic both Mateo and Duck out of their positions, and that's what they did. So at around that same time, some other unfounded accusations apparently surfaced, accusing Mateo of pocketing $150,000 of the main bank's money. It said that Mateo used that money to purchase a house in Lemoore, California. But this was nothing more than cannon fodder to justify Mateo's demotion. Nothing was ever proven, and there was never any evidence to substantiate this. But yet, it was still used in accordance with their feeble plan. So then Trini from Earlymar and Capone from Grifas were then elevated to fill their vacant positions on the inner council, bypassing all the more qualified C's that had been around a lot longer than a lot of these guys. C's that I personally know out there right now myself. Not only that, but this is also breaking NF protocol. These brothers were put on the inner council without making the ultimate sacrifice or the new fulfilled blood oath requirement that is required in order to be put on the inner council. This new blood oath is a mandate that stipulates eligibility requirements for all new inner council members. You basically have to drop a body on behalf of the organization in order to be eligible to become an inner council member or to even be qualified for that position. And it can't just be anybody such as the one that you came to prison for. It has to be committed specifically for the purpose of the organization. It has to be committed for the sole purpose of the NF and on behalf of the NF, something that neither Trini or Capone had. All this was really about was to help solidify Conejo and Chuco's power base. So after Mateo and Duck are both stripped and relieved of their positions, tensions rise at Pleasant Valley State Prison. The other C's that were loyal to Chuco and Conejo begin to treat Duck and Mateo like they've been ostracized. It was inherently obvious at that point that they were no longer trusted and that they were being kept out of the loop insofar as household business goes. They weren't privy to anything that was going on that yard. By July of 2019, things had become so bad on that yard that everybody knew that something was bound to happen. Something was about to happen. So one day when Mateo and Duck were out on the yard, Duck's spidey senses must have been tingling that day because apparently he detected something and seen movement on the yard that he didn't like. At one point, he tells Mateo, "Hey brother, you need to watch your back. Something's off kilter and something's going on out here." And Duck was right. A squad was assembled under the direction of Gordon Douglas, Chino from Oakland, with the direction to hit Mateo. And keep in mind, none of this was over any of the frivolous accusations of the misappropriations of money or any of the other accusations that were being waged against him. This was all predicated over the fact that Mateo had balls big enough to confront these renegade C's for hijacking the O and for pushing their own self-serving agendas, or basically because of his loyalty to NF leadership that were now housed in the federal prison system. So on October 1st, 2019, on B Yard, which is a 270 design in Pleasant Valley State Prison, the following events took place. After Duck warns Mateo to keep his head on a swivel and to watch his back, Mateo, along with his security detail, are pushing across the yard and are in an area close to buildings B1 and B2. When Mateo gets to the east end of the basketball court, Chino from Oakland and Michael Washington, Mikeo from San Jose, take flight on Mateo. Both of them had bangers and they start stabbing him right there on the basketball court. Another squad that included Juan Garcia, Monster from San Jose, Joe Ramirez, Travieso from Modesto, and Joshua Cortez, Buddha from Grifas, convene to the basketball court and join in on the melee. By this time, one of the towers gets on the PA system and orders everyone on the yard to get down and prone out. In one of the reports, it said that the majority of the yard complied. However, there was approximately 45 NF members and NR members that were fighting in various areas of the yard. So once the initial shock wears off and Mateo's security details figures out what's going on, they go from defense to offense and they start butchering these guys. NF members Raul Castruda, Cool Raul from Salinas, Donald Moran, Duck from San Francisco, Robert Barone, Colombo from Sacra, and Matthew Martin, Duke from Woodland, go to defend Mateo. When they get there, they start attacking Chino and Mikeo on the basketball court. You know, it was said, I don't know how true this is, but it was said that Travieso was initially on one of the hit teams, and that when he went to hit Mateo, you could tell that he didn't want to really be involved. I talked to Mateo and he said that you could just tell by the look on his face that he didn't want to be involved and that he felt bad for coming at me. That was one of my boys. He then said all of a sudden he looked over and he seen Travieso switch teams and start attacking Chino. By this point, they've now completely turned the tables on Chino and his squad, and they're giving these fools the business. There's too many of them, I can't do it. Oh, besides that, there was one viewer that said he didn't like me doing that, so I'm not allowed to do that no more. So Mateo, at some point, he starts issuing verbal commands telling these guys to push forward and to stay on these cats. And that's what they did. Mateo, Duck, Cool Raul, and Duke, Travieso and Duke start hitting Chino and Mikeo. And then they refused to prone out despite several warnings that they were about to be shot. So at one point, Chino, he starts pleading with these guys and he tells them that he was just following orders. But by then, they're not trying to hear shit and they're punishing them. So finally, after several more minutes of issuing these guys verbal commands to get down on the ground and prone out, and after firing multiple rounds of what are called handball grenades of OC spray, they finally get down and regain control of the yard. So Mateo, Chino, and Mikeo were all taken to an outside hospital and treated for their stab wounds. So this was the gist of it. If you really think about it, it's crazy that you had so many NF and NR members who were willing to stand up and go to war for one individual. It goes to show you what kind of C Mateo really was. He was and still is highly respected in Salinas. Anyways, this is the true accurate description of what happened. No, BJ, he would end up getting hit about 2 weeks later in Salinas Valley, but I'll get into that in another profile. You guys already know what happened after that. Not long after, he ended up tapping out and is now on an SNY yard. You guys already know what happened after that. Not long after, he ended up tapping out and is now on an SNY yard in Corcoran. I'll be running something separate on that sometime in the very near future. On a side note, I can't even tell you guys how many times I've been called about some of the stories that have been put out there on YouTube where Mateo was like, bro, what the fluster is that? And who is that? So again, people, just be mindful of the fact that some people are just spewing out stories just so that they could get a bag at the end of the month. They don't know these people, nor have they ever been around them. But yet, they'll talk about them like they have been. I told Mateo that I was going to set the record straight and that I was finally going to break my silence. And he was okay with that. Now that nobody's speculating and that everyone knows the outcome, now that no one's speculating and that everyone knows the outcome, it was just that time for me to answer some of the questions that some of you have been asking. From what I was told, Mateo testified for multiple days and he didn't hang his head about nothing. Like a lot of us, he felt betrayed, and like some of us others that have been betrayed by some of these same individuals, he went in there, he looked straight at him, and he did what he had to do. You know what was funny is that Conejo and DC's whole defense was predicated on self-defense, on playing the victims. They said they were just trying to get Mateo before he had a chance to spread his gospel and before he had a chance to get them. I tried to get Mateo to come on so that you guys could hear this directly from him himself. However, his attorney wants him to fly under the radar until after he gets sentenced. Once he's sentenced, I'm going to bring him on the channel and I'm going to let him tell you guys his story himself. Like I said, I reached out to him, I talked to him, but he said he wasn't going to do that before he gets sentenced. I'm sure he wants to address a lot of the misinformation and false propaganda that's been put out there by other channels himself. So just to recap on some of the other individuals that were mentioned in this story, word on the curb is that BJ is now on a level 2 yard, which kind of explains why he doesn't want to reach out. I don't know how true it is, but that's what's being said. BJ's brother, Sleepy, he ended up paroling. Drifter, who is BJ's ex-brother-in-law, he tapped out. And Joe Jeff, Mateo's primo, is said to be going through the debriefing process. After this incident in Pleasant Valley, Mikeo from San Jose was transferred to a 50-50 yard in Pelican Bay State Prison. Soon after he got there, he stabbed an older dropout to get off the yard. I'm not sure how long he stayed there, but eventually he was transferred back to Pleasant Valley State Prison and landed on the yard with Jaime Guzman, Bookie from Porterville, and Joe Gaxiola, Crow from Modesto. I'm sure I'll be revisiting this topic in the coming months as these guys make their way into the federal prison system. The blowback isn't nearly over, and I'm sure others know this themselves. In closing, the NF is definitely losing its luster. I don't say that with any intentions on disrespecting the NF, but it's just not like it used to be. And there's no question about the fact that decades of progress were lost during the time when all these events were taking place. It's bad out there on these main lines. From the stories that I've heard, some of the stuff I don't even want to repeat. You look at everything from the caliber of C that represents the NF today, how they move, the way they talk, down to the lack of trust, and you can't do nothing but shake your head about it. Like I said, I don't say this as a form of disrespect either. This is an organization that I represented for many years. I'm just simply stating the facts. Imagine what the Mexican Mafia is saying. They got themselves on autopilot. They don't got to do nothing but sit back and watch the self-destructing process. They don't have to do nothing but sit back and watch these guys implode and self-destruct with everyone else. For their sake, I hope they turn the corner. Anyways, I hope you guys have enjoyed this episode of Paradigm Profiles. If you guys liked this episode, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't like this episode, give it a thumbs down. But either way, drop a comment and let me know what you think. As always, I want to thank you guys for your unwavering support and again for just continuing to be loyal viewers. Until the next one, you guys enjoy the rest of your week and keep pushing that positivity. With that being said, this is your boy B, and I'm gone.